When everything becomes cheap enough to win, no one wins. For decades, China's rise looked unstoppable. The factory of the world, built on efficiency so ruthless it seemed like an art form. Cities that never slept, assembly lines that glowed through the night, prices that dropped like clockwork, year after year, until Western competitors simply gave up trying. It was the miracle of scale, discipline, and planning, a civilization turning human labor into economic horsepower. But every miracle hides a cost, and China's greatest strength, its ability to make everything cheaper, faster, and bigger, has become the very thing pulling it down. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. China's story is the story of modern capitalism stretched to its breaking point, a system that rewards growth at all costs, even when those costs destroy the future it depends on. What happens when the world's largest economy optimizes itself into exhaustion, when efficiency becomes self-destruction? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning of the Chinese economic miracle. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping stood before the Communist Party and broke one of socialism's deepest taboos. He told China that getting rich was not shameful, it was patriotic. And with that, he unleashed one of the fastest economic transformations the world had ever seen. Overnight, peasants became entrepreneurs. The countryside turned into factories. And foreign investors, first from Japan, then from the United States, and later from Europe, saw a gold mine, cheap labor, endless manpower, and a government eager to make deals. China opened a handful of special economic zones, small test cities where the rules were different. No central planning, no bureaucratic drag, no ideological purity tests. Just one goal: attract capital and create exports. It worked too well. Shenzhen, a sleepy fishing town of 30,000 people, exploded into a metropolis of millions. Within 2 decades, the formula spread everywhere. Each province wanted its own boom. Each city wanted to be the next Shenzhen. Local governments borrowed and built highways, power plants, industrial parks, all to lure more factories. By the early 2000s, China wasn't just growing. It was devouring the world's demand for everything: steel, coal, copper, oil. Every Western company that wanted to survive offshored production there. If something could be manufactured, it would eventually be made in China. But underneath that unstoppable rise was a dangerous incentive. Success meant being cheaper than everyone else. Each local government competed for factories by cutting land prices, cutting taxes, cutting wages. Firms competed by cutting margins, cutting quality, cutting profits. Everyone was chasing growth. No one was chasing sustainability. It was a race to the bottom disguised as progress. For a while, it didn't matter. The machine was too powerful. Workers flooded in from the countryside, millions every year, willing to work 12-hour days for a fraction of Western wages. The factories never stopped. The ports never slept. Western consumers got their miracle. The $5 t-shirt, the $300 iPhone, the illusion of abundance without inflation. And China got rich. But somewhere between the 10th new shopping mall and the 100th steel mill, the system began to overheat. The miracle became an addiction. Local governments needed growth to pay back the loans they had taken to build more factories. So they built even more. By 2015, China's steel capacity alone was more than the rest of the world combined. Entire industrial zones were producing goods faster than global demand could absorb them. Prices started to fall, not because of innovation, but because of desperation. Factories didn't slow down when profits disappeared. They accelerated, hoping that volume could make up for loss. It didn't. That's when a new phrase began circulating, one borrowed from the human world, but now describing an economic one: involution. Involution isn't just about people working harder for less. It's about companies producing more for less, competition that stops being about innovation and becomes about survival. In the past, involution described Chinese students or workers pushing themselves to exhaustion for shrinking rewards. But now, it's industrial. It's systemic. A whole sector's locked in a zero-sum war for market share, where the only weapon left is price. Solar panels, electric vehicles, batteries, all symbols of China's new economy, became its battleground. Dozens of firms, many state-backed, flooded markets with identical products, each cutting prices to underbid the next. Margins vanished, but no one dared stop. In a system where output equals legitimacy, losing production means losing face. So the cycle feeds itself. Firms slash prices to keep market share. Competitors match them. Profits collapse. Wages stall. Consumers cheer for a while, until they realize that cheap abundance comes at the cost of prosperity. China has entered an era of industrial involution, a self-destructive loop where efficiency devours profit and production devours purpose. It's not a race to innovate anymore. It's a race to the bottom. And like all races to the bottom, no one ever wins. This is why China's solar panels are now sold below cost. why electric vehicles pile up in lots waiting for buyers, why tech giants fight for the same shrinking domestic demand, even as their valuations tumble, and why, despite record exports, industrial profits fell by over 20% in 2024, because when everyone is competing to be the cheapest, price becomes the only thing left that can fall. That's not capitalism in overdrive. It's capitalism eating itself. And here's the irony. China has seen this before. In the 2000s, when overproduction in coal and steel pushed prices to the floor, Beijing had to step in and cut capacity by force, closing mines, merging plants, and firing hundreds of thousands of workers. It was economic triage. The country accepted short-term pain to avoid total collapse. 2 decades later, it's happening again. Only this time, the patient isn't a single industry. It's the entire growth model. Factories don't close because a spreadsheet says they should. They close when politics allows them to. And in China, politics doesn't reward contraction. It rewards motion, even if that motion is running in circles. Behind closed doors, party officials know the numbers. Falling profits, stalled wages, rising debt. But publicly, the message remains the same. Keep producing, keep growing, keep believing. Because if the machine stops, so does the illusion. By the 2020s, China's efficiency machine had become something else entirely. An economy locked in an arms race against itself. From the outside, it still looked like triumph. The world saw record exports, glittering new factories, and a pipeline of electric cars and solar panels so vast it could power continents. But inside, profit margins were collapsing. The miracle had stopped creating wealth. It was now just recycling it, faster and thinner every year. This is what economists call overcapacity. But in China, overcapacity isn't a flaw, it's policy. Take the solar industry. In 2023 alone, China produced more than twice the world's total demand for panels. Prices fell nearly 40% in a single year. Companies sold below cost just to move inventory. Dozens of smaller firms went bankrupt. But the giants kept producing because their local governments needed the jobs, the output numbers, the illusion of progress. Now look at electric vehicles. Over 100 Chinese EV brands are fighting for the same shrinking domestic market. Each one cutting prices to survive, pushing others to follow. The government steps in with subsidies, trying to prevent mass layoffs. But subsidies only feed the cycle. More supply, lower prices, thinner margins. You can see where this goes. In the first half of 2024, China's industrial profits fell by over 20%. That's despite exports staying strong. Factories are moving more goods than ever, and earning less from every one of them. The national economy is still growing, but the quality of that growth is eroding from within. But here's the twist. Not all of this is a mistake. Some of it is by design. China's government has long mastered the art of weaponized efficiency, using subsidies to keep key industries alive long enough to crush their competition. It's not about quarterly profit. It's about strategic monopoly. In industries like solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles, Beijing doesn't mind losing money in the short term. It wants control of the future. Local governments pour billions into factories, cheap loans, and tax breaks so companies can sell products below cost, not to survive, but to eliminate rivals. The logic is ruthless. Flood the market, undercut everyone, and wait. Western competitors, bound by private shareholders and short-term profit demands, can't keep up. They fold. And once the global supply chain depends on Chinese production, China can do what monopolies have always done: raise prices, dictate terms, and dominate the value chain. This playbook isn't new. It's the same one China used with steel, rare earth metals, and shipbuilding. In each case, it underpriced the world until the world had no other option. But this time, the scale is unprecedented. These aren't old industrial commodities. They're the materials of the future. Lithium batteries, photovoltaic cells, electric drivetrains, the arteries of the 21st century economy. In theory, it's genius. In practice, it's fragile, because there's a limit to how long an empire can lose money, even strategically, before the system starts to rot. When every sector expects the government to back its losses, efficiency becomes addiction. Firms stop competing on innovation and start competing on subsidies. Productivity turns into politics, and the line between national strategy and national liability begins to blur. That's the hidden danger behind China's price wars. They're not just economic battles, they're fiscal time bombs. Every yuan spent keeping factories alive today is borrowed from tomorrow's stability. Eventually, someone has to pay the bill. And that's what makes this version of the China trap so tragic. The same strategy that once helped China conquer markets is now threatening to consume its own economy from within. Because domination built on loss isn't victory, it's deferred collapse. It's not the collapse of demand that kills an empire, it's the collapse of purpose. And here, purpose has been replaced by momentum, a system that can't afford to slow down because every level of it depends on motion. Local governments need factories running to service their debt. State-owned banks need those factories borrowing to justify their balance sheets. And the central government needs all of them working to maintain the illusion of full employment. If any part of the chain stops, the rest begins to unravel. So everyone keeps pretending that more output equals more prosperity, even when it no longer does. This is the political logic behind state capitalism. Production is proof of control. When growth falters, the state doesn't retreat. It builds another factory. When prices fall, it lowers them further. When the private sector hesitates, local governments step in with more credit. The solution to every imbalance is more of the same imbalance. It's not irrational, it's survival. Because China's economy isn't just an engine of wealth, it's an engine of legitimacy. Its social contract has one clause: keep growing, and the people will keep believing. That worked when growth created rising incomes. It doesn't when growth only creates cheaper goods. The paradox is brutal. China's industrial overproduction keeps inflation low worldwide, yet it also depresses its own wages and demand. The country that lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty now struggles to raise living standards for those it already lifted. And the more it exports its deflation, the more fragile the global system becomes. In the West, cheap Chinese goods once felt like a gift. They kept inflation tame, filled stores, and made middle-class life affordable. But now that same abundance is exporting weakness. Western factories can't compete. Emerging markets can't build their own industries. And the global price of cheap is stagnation. China didn't invent this trap. History did. The pattern is as old as empires. Britain's coal industry once flooded global markets, driving prices so low that even British miners couldn't make a living. The solution? Colonies. Captive markets to absorb the excess. Japan's miracle economy in the 1980s hit the same wall. Overcapacity, deflation, and an aging population that stopped spending. In Rome, its downfall began not with invasion, but with overproduction. Vast estates worked by slaves pumped out so much grain that prices collapsed, bankrupting small farmers, the backbone of the republic. Rome fed itself into imbalance. Every empire that masters efficiency eventually faces the same test. Can it stop optimizing long enough to survive? China's leaders understand this. That's why they talk endlessly about rebalancing, shifting from investment-led growth to consumption. But rebalancing takes time, and time is the one resource a system addicted to growth doesn't have. So while Beijing tries to steer the ship toward innovation and consumption, its provinces are still building more factories, more infrastructure, more output, because that's what their incentives demand. It's like trying to diet while the kitchen keeps cooking. The irony is that many of China's most overproduced goods, solar panels, batteries, EVs, are the very things the world needs for the energy transition. But when prices collapse and companies fail, even green revolutions can stall. The rest of the world gets cheaper technology, at the cost of China's own profitability. Cheap abundance becomes a trap, not because it fails to create wealth, but because it destroys the motivation to create more. And once that happens, efficiency turns from a virtue into a disease. China's problem isn't too little productivity, it's too much. It's an empire that has mastered production but lost its balance. A system that can flood the world with goods, yet can't generate enough demand to make it profitable. There's a cruel symmetry in that. The very force that made China rich, relentless competition, now ensures no one can rest long enough to stay rich. This is what happens when growth becomes identity, when production replaces purpose, when the measure of progress is how much cheaper you can make something that no one needs more of. That's not development. It's involution on an industrial scale, and like every empire before it, China is learning that there's nothing more expensive than being too cheap. Because when a system optimizes everything except balance, eventually the only thing left to destroy is itself. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.